Hey guys, the first one video was really sketch, so I've upgraded to me and my whiteboard. We'll see if this is any better. So first of all, I was going through quizzes, and I know that we reviewed a few quiz questions that everyone struggled with last night in class, but there are a few longer ones that I didn't have time to review with all of you, and some of those included some trial balance problems. I noticed that some of you were struggling with those, so I wanted to review maybe a couple tips / tricks with those in a video. Something about trial balances is that they include accounts from your balance sheet and from your income statement. So far, they've been relatively simple in the trial balance. They've listed the income state accounts on the bottom half and the balance sheet accounts on the top half. But they could be mixed up. I would hate for you guys to somehow miss an account because they're mixed up and you're not used to it, or even like later on in the class. For them to be mixed up and you guys to get confused. So just keep an eye out and be able to differentiate. And then I also just want you guys to include the right numbers, even when you know the right account. Sometimes in the stress of the test, you just mix them up. So to review, this is something that I like to do. You're not allowed to write on the test, so I use lots and lots of scratch paper. To repeat, you are allowed to bring a calculator to the exam, and you're allowed to bring lots and lots of scratch paper, and I really recommend that you do. I would probably bring like 3 sheets of paper in. I would say 3 sheets of paper. I tend to write a lot on the exams, but that also is what kind of helps me not make mistakes. If you write it down instead of doing it all in your head, you are much less prone to mistakes. So please use scratch paper. To that point, this is what I do on my scratch paper. I will write down what is on the exam. These would be my accounts on the trial balance. Maybe you have a cash account, unearned revenue, paid in capital, sales, wage expense, ad expense, beginning revenue, equipment, and prepaid expense. And then I would go through and say, okay, cash is an asset, unearned revenue is a liability, paid in capital, owner's equity, sales is a revenue, expense, that's an expense, that's an expense, beginning retained earnings, that belongs in owner's equity, equipment, that's an asset, and then prepaid expense. It's an expense, but it's prepaid, so it's an asset. Please keep that straight. Sometimes people on the test really like to make prepaid expense an expense and put it on the income statement. That's not where it goes. Prepaid expense is an asset. So once I have all these labels, I kind of clue in on the test question, and for instance, if they were asking me find owner's equity, I could go through and get rid and cross out like the asset accounts, things like that. If they're just concerned with my if they're just concerned with like sales and expenses, things like that, I could get rid of equipment and prepaid expense, cash, unearned revenue, paid in capital. The one exception here is going to be beginning retained earnings, because if they're asking me to find the change of retained earnings, then I don't need this. But if they're asking me to find ending retained earnings, I will need to take into account beginning retained earnings. So this one's a little complicated. Ending retained earnings goes on the balance sheet, and so that's why we take this into account. It's the only one we would take into account on the balance sheet. And then if they're asking for change in retained earnings, that one really doesn't matter, because change in retained earnings is found on the income statement through your revenues and expenses and dividends. Okay, that should help solve some issues. If you guys have more questions on trial balances, let me know.